This is going to be a difficult one for me to talk today, and I hope that it's going to be a positive, like a really big part of my healing and moving on. I want to try and I've got some points just so I don't forget. I want to try and bring together all the work that I've been doing over many years and all the failures that I've had and um, things that have worked for me as well. And I'm at a point now where I think I'm ready to really stop having these things be part of my everyday and to, you know, they will always be there. The memories will always be there, and I'll need to spend many years working on focusing on healing now. But I think I'm at a point where I can actually bring together all the because it's been such a difficult journey for me to actually um, go through processes of disclosure and go through therapy and um, at points it made me unwell, so it would be good to actually just talk about this now and bring it to a point where I can make something constructive of my journey through this so that I can make a significant point in time that can then pass and I can then move on and not have these things consume me and be part of my constant or not it's not necessarily constant now, but it's daily, it's there all the time. It is constant, really. It's something that I find difficult to escape from, and it's been there for so long, and it's caused so much pain and it's caused so much damage, and it's I'm now at a point where I want to move on and I want to let go and start another part of my life. So this is like an update of where I've talked about a lot of this stuff in previous videos, and um, but this is bringing it all together. So I've talked about how I've had traumatic experiences my entire life. Almost every year of my life, there's been something. There's been periods where there hasn't been much going on, but almost my whole life, there's been something major. And, you know, um, it has a, a, a compounding effect. And that's why I got stuck in these states for so long. So I'll just go through. So the early this is all about what I'm talking about today is specifically early childhood, adolescent. and how I've gone through the process of um, how how it affected me then, and how I dealt with it in later in life, and then finally going through getting therapy, and then positive, negative effects. And I'll try and not make this too long. I didn't put a chat here because I need to just speak. So the earliest one was probably not such a, excuse me, I've got gastrointestinal reflux, whatever, gourd, whatever you call it. I need to take tablets for it. I haven't taken my tablet today, so um, the first one wasn't in relation to everything else, not that major, but it still had a lasting effect on me. Um, and was something that I had would have flashbacks to this over and over throughout my life. It wasn't, when I say it wasn't as major I'm saying in comparison to other things, the other experiences, but it was still very painful, and has a very deep, painful aspect to it. Part of the healing from this was that I did get confirmation about this. So I can move on from this. And I understand that this thing actually caused probably just as much pain in other people. The next thing that happened around the same age was what say is the major one. And again, I had confirmation on this from several sources where over many years I went through talking about this, and with people. And again, this, when I say it was major, it was very painful for everyone involved. So um, I've had to reconcile my experience, and it was major for me because it extended over a period of time, and then in effect has been there for such a long period of time, and that it was something I could never speak about for so long until I got to the point about 6 years ago when I went through a process of um, finding out, and I got confirmation. And I got to see how this affected other people in such a painful way. And I could understand from my perspective how it was something that didn't directly happen to me, but it was something that it almost was, in a sense. And I don't want to um, diminish the fact that the pain that was suffered by the person that this thing happened to was the central figure that caught that not that felt and had to live with. And so I this was an additional aspect to that whole thing, was that this didn't directly happen to me, yet was affected by it. That was a big one, and that was a big one, and that was one that over a large period of time I went through a process of um, clarification, and part of the healing through that was to actually get that confirmation, so I don't ever have to think about, well, I will think about it, but I don't have to speak about it ever again. And I went through a final part of that process a few months ago, or a month and a half ago. I don't know exactly when. And this was major for me because it was the major one, even though it wasn't directly my own trauma, if that makes sense. The next one was something I had partial confirmation on. Um, so that is painful in itself. And so there'll always be ambiguity regarding this. But these, like all of my traumas, these memories are burnt into my brain. They, they are crystal clear and they're burnt in there, and they will always be there. What I'm doing is letting go of that part and allowing it to not be there. So that one, that was uh, maybe a year later, 6 months to a year later. And that was very painful. And I've gone through a forgiveness process of that. And I do believe that um, part of that ability to do that was the fact that in this situation, the person who caused the pain was themselves had to go through the pain of what they did. And that was part of the whole trauma. That was part of what happened that day. and that's actually why it actually became even more traumatic. It was that things changed, and I'm not going into details. The next thing, which was about 6 months or a year later, I got confirmation on again, and this was painful, and that was a process that I went through um, years ago. And I first went through this with a psychologist over 10 years ago, and I empathized with the person responsible, because the person who was responsible wasn't the actual person who inflicted the damage. And the person who inflicted the damage was the same age as me. So I could empathize with that, and I could see it as an accident. What I what was the traumatic aspect to it was the fact that I was then victimized by my. I'm trying to do this without speaking in detail. I was then the person who was responsible for me and who was my preschool teacher. I've forgiven them. So I understood that this person was just doing their job, and that they aren't able to be accountable for accidents that happen in the schoolyard. But this was a very serious accident. It was very traumatic and very painful, and it was violent, and the way it was dealt with was not right. And this was back in the days where accountability wasn't really part of um, how things were done. So essentially, I was basically handed over the fence, crying and sobbing, handed over the fence, the gate, and that's all that was said. Nothing was said. That's what I was told, that nothing was said, that they just handed me over. But what happened that day was I was bludgeoned. I'm sorry, I won't go into the details, but I was severely attacked by someone in the schoolyard, and it was an accident. And the trauma that I experienced was I was then aware of what happened. And sorry, I'm trying not to go into details, but like there was guilt, and I was singled out by my teacher, and I was treated in a certain way and made to not speak. by how I was treated. And I'll never forget how I was treated and the words that she said to me over and over, and how she singled me out in front of the class and purposefully got me to shut my mouth. And I could see her guilt and I could see her. And that's how I've gotten past this, because I was able to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go into details. I won't go into any more details, but this was an experience that had such strong ramifications on my development, is how this incident where I was forgiving of the person who attacked me, and I'm forgiving, and I have forgiven. So once I've forgiven, I should not speak about it, but I have to actually. I'm sorry. It was such a painful thing to actually be singled out and made to shut up repeatedly. And she used specific language, which I won't talk about here, but I've talked about this with my psychologist in the past, and how damaging that was. That these specific things that she would repeat to me caused me to shut down and to shut my mouth. Now, I know that this has happened to many other people, this very particular behavior of getting people to shut their mouth. And that's why it's what's such a painful thing for me. Um, the, what happened when I was around 8 or 9, I went to the police about a few years ago, and it made me unwell. I became paranoid, and I withdrew my complaint. And there is no ability. I thought about reopening that, and but then I looked into it, and it's almost impossible. So that was painful, and that did damage to me, made me very unwell. It contributed to me being unwell, and that's what really sort of put me on um, a downward spiral, or a negative spiral. So that was a negative experience, and I don't think I can get a reconcile for this at all, whether compared to all the other things I can forgive and move on. I can I don't know, like, because with this, like, it's such a difficult thing because there's nothing I can do about it, and I can't do anything about any of the other things either. They're all in the past, and so what I wanna try and say is it's moving on, but at least I went through that process, you know? I went to the police station, I told them what happened, and then I wrote a report, and that was very painful, and this was out of all of my experiences, this was the only one that had fragments where it was murky. Not murky where I'm not clear, but like murky as in it's like there were bits missing. Whereas other experiences, they it's not like okay, if we want to talk about memories right now, they are you do have sections where they're like fragments, but for all of these experiences, they are large sections of time that are very clear and this one is very actually very clear and in my report that I had to write, so this was part of the healing maybe, I don't know, is that I had to actually write down what happened in detail, and it was very painful, and I had to actually say where it got where where because in comparison to other experiences where it's crystal clear and burnt in, like, I mean that this is burnt into my brain as well, but like there's like bigger gaps, whereas the other ones there's like almost no gaps between, you know, so it's different in comparison to the other ones. It's also different in other aspects as well, which is why I wanted to take it to the police because I felt like there needed to be justice for other people in this situation. So, and that was a couple of years ago now when I went through that. So the remaining of my early childhood, adolescent trauma I processed recently, and I talked about this how I did it in several ways, and I again look this going back to the previous one, I have had confirmation as well on that from several people. Um, this one, these two, there were two things that I went through, and I explained how I went through it with psychologist and then also through a counselor, and they were both part of this whole. I and I had confirmation on that as well. So everything I've talked about here today are things that I've had to actually go through and in my own time, almost like I'm a detective researching a case, go through it, and then because there are things you can't talk about, or or you can't, or you won't, or you don't want to. I've let go of all of these things now. Even though I've let go of them, especially this last one I talked about, where I was, especially one of them, I was very angry about how I was put in this situation, and I was not necessarily, I was a victim, but I wasn't the victim, if that makes sense. So I could then empathize with the person who was the actual victim. And then I could also empathize with all the people in the situation. So that's how I could, um, it's so painful and difficult. And that's why all these things, the thing about these things is they're so complex. They're not just one person or one thing. Often there's multiple things, multiple places, parties, people, um, time frames, responsibilities, um, understanding and empathizing with the other side helps in order to move on as well. And that's for all of these things that I've got here. They're all things where I'm not the central person here. Like maybe I am in a, a, a few of them, but I see that other people have gone through just as much pain over these things. No, maybe not just as much pain. Like I'm not giving myself enough, um, putting myself in a central position to truly go through what these things are in order to actually, because again, this is part of what we do is we separate ourselves from the fact that we try and deny and we try and blame ourselves or all these things, and none of that helps. But what does help is to actually empathize with, if you can, with other people who are either aware or knew or had to deal with. And that's So the only real thing I went into detail here was my experience in the schoolyard in preschool, where I was bludgeoned and then handed over the fence, and nothing was said. That's what I was told. And that is what, if in comparison to all the other things, that is just physical violence perpetrated by someone of my own age. It may or may not have had long term damage physically, mentally, yes. The real damage was how I was treated afterwards in the covering up process, by being singled out and dismissed and made to shut up. And this happened repeatedly. And this is something that stuck with me for a long time and contributed to my developmental problems and my trust issues. So that's the only thing I spoke in detail about today. Now, this person, and I've talked about this, is that I've had to empathize with this teacher. Can you imagine what she felt when she had to deal with this situation? She had all the kids in running around, and then bang, someone gets clobbered. What does she do? So her instinct or her method was to say nothing, don't report it. Um, but the actual damage was the fact that I was victimized afterwards. And the only reason why I'm talking about this experience is because it is nothing in comparison to the other ones. So all the other ones that I talked about here have much greater impact, much greater severity. And I told myself I wasn't going to go into detail, and I did it. I'm sorry. Maybe this is part of my catharsis and letting go and moving on. And I'm sorry that I've shared this trauma with you, but I've tried to do it in an empathic way, where I've tried to actually understand the perspective of this person in responsibility, or the superior, the person who's responsible for these young children. And I have, you know, gone through this forgiveness process, which I actually first was my went through many years ago when I first started seeing a psychologist. Was this is like the first thing I opened up about. And I think this empathizing or understanding the pain that the other people go through helps. Doesn't make it any easier for the pain necessarily, but it helps you move on and let go. And that's a major aspect to what I'm trying to actually do myself. So all of these things, these major things, I want to never speak about anymore. My channel here will become more about healing and less about what my shit is. I've got a lot of healing to do. Like, my pain is very great, but I'm also very grateful and very fortunate that I can speak right now also, but also I have an opportunity to keep and heal myself. I can't take any I can't go back in time. So I have to live now. And in order to do that, I have to actually let go of the past. It will always be there. I don't want to forget it. I can't forget it. But I don't want it to be controlling me and affecting me every day. I'm looking at this and it's like a period of time. And I'm moving on. I'm I'm somehow doing this. I don't know how. Like, I reached out for support today and I got some great support. And do that, you know, do that yourself. And there's people there for you. Just find where they are and um I'm lost for words now. I really feel like there has been a change and a movement towards letting go. And I've been actively working towards letting go. And I think that there is a resistance that you're wanting to let go, but you're still holding on. But you just have to let go. And all of these things that I talked about here, I went through a process of letting go. And sometimes it took actually letting go several times because you end up either you find it in your pocket or it grabs onto you, or you wake up in the middle of the night. Um, or you're reminded of it. So it will always be there. Somehow allow it to not have that effect anymore. And for me, I think I'm at a point where I'm still going to have pain. I'm still going to have flashbacks in some form, or the memories will always be there, but they won't be in the forefront of my mind. That will be a big thing. You know, I have to be grateful for what I have now, and that it's food, shelter. I have love and respect, and we don't all have those things, and that's what makes it difficult. And it has been difficult for me in the past when not all those things have been there. So when those things aren't there, it becomes more difficult. But look for those things because there are nice people in the world, and find meaning even if you don't think there is any meaning to anything. Find a meaning to it. You know, how do I find meaning to this stuff? I look back and I go, why? And then, you know, what is the point? What is the meaning? That's that's it's not something to focus on. You know, focus on what you have and what you can work towards. You know, and it's difficult for me still. You know, I'm I'm barely getting through the days, but I'm actually progressing. I look back and I go, yes, I didn't do nothing, but and then I did this. So it's not all like I'm too harsh on myself. But then give yourself goals. You know, let go of this stuff. Let go of it all. A little bit here. It just broke off. See, something will always drop away because it you try and put everything together and squish it into a ball. It's made from different parts and something they won't all connect. So when it does, you know, find a way, tuck it back in. Look, here we go. This can now become part of the earth again, and I don't have to think about it anymore.